The sperm hits the egg, conception occurs, and you've just about ended all the things that everybody agrees on.
Coming up on Philosophy Talk, abortion.
Why does the subject of abortion generate so much heat and so little light?
We, from the very beginning, started in on an either-or.
Our guest is Cynthia Gorney, author of Articles of Faith, A History of the Abortion Wars.
Either it's completely a part of the woman's body and she has dominion absolutely all the way to the end, or it's absolutely a separate person and she has no choice in it.
Is a fetus a living human being? That is the question.
Is a fetus a person? That is the question.
Our problem is that we haven't thought enough about the moral status of the fetus.
Who decides? Science?
Religion?
The courts?
Or philosophy?
This entire conundrum is like something cooked up to break philosophy students' heads.
Recorded in front of a live audience at the Marsh Theater in San Francisco.
Abortion. Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Today, we're recording the program in front of a live audience at the Marsh Theater, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performance.
Our thinking originates at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus.
Welcome, everyone, to Philosophy Talk. Our topic today is the hot-button issue of abortion, John.
That's a very frightening topic, Ken.
Oh, come on, John. We're the program that questions everything. We're not afraid to plunge into the discussion of any idea, no matter how controversial.
I'm not afraid of ideas, Ken. Bring them on. It's the people that care so much about the ideas that I worry about. I don't want some nut from a fringe right-to-life group to blow up KALW or the Marsh Theater.
Well, John, as popular as we are, I don't think we have a big listener base on the violent fringe of the right-to-life movement.
Well, how about the other side? I mean, I've had people tell me that I'm some sort of macho, control freakish, insensitive, stereotypical male a-hole for saying things like, abortion, that raises some interesting philosophical questions.
Well, John, you may be, well, John.
You were going to say, I may be a macho a-hole, but
I was
not
going to say
reaction.
that, but I thought better. But anyway, gird your loins. Because, like it or not, we're going to talk about abortion, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to shed light rather than heat.
Well, then, in the spirit, I think the first thing we need to do is to divide it into two issues.
Okay, go for it.
Well, there are two potential acts that you're thinking about when you're thinking about the rights and wrongs of abortion. There's abortion itself, an act perpetrated on a fetus. And then there's the possible act of restraining a woman from getting an abortion, an act perpetrated on the woman. And so you can ask about each of them, right or wrong. Now, first, why is abortion morally objectionable if it is? Are we violating the rights of the fetus? Is it a person and we're violating its rights? Or is there some other, maybe a little bit more abstract reason, like that it expresses a cavalier attitude towards human life?
Okay, so that's one moral question. What would you think the second moral question is?
Well, the second one is, now, if you're thinking about the interference with a woman's choice to have done with her body what she wants, to have an abortion, well, why is that morally objectionable if it is? Have you wronged the woman? Do we as a society or a government have the right to interfere with an exercise of that choice? If so, or why not?
Well, wait a minute. But doesn't the answer to the first question just determine the answer to the second question?
Well, you might think if it's morally objectionable to abort a fetus, then it's morally right to keep people from doing it. But things aren't that simple. Just because there might be something morally objectionable about doing something, it doesn't follow that the government has the right to interfere with that person's doing it.
Well, explain that to me. I'm not sure I get that.
Well, I mean, I think it's wrong to drink yourself silly in your own home in a way that undermines your potential as a human being and your ability to have relationships with other people. I think that's morally objectionable. It's the wrong thing to do. But I don't think the government or society has the right to prevent me from doing that wrong thing in my own home, alone, not hurting anybody else.
Yeah, but the abortion case is different, John. It's not parallel. Because if abortion is wrong because a fetus has a right to life, and abortion is in fact the murder of a human being, it's a much more serious wrong, and a wrong of a completely different kind than drinking oneself into oblivion. I mean, if that's the right answer to the first question, that abortion is murder, then doesn't that just determine the answer to the second, that the government and society have a right, not just a right, a duty to prevent abortions?
Well, you might think so, but there's a famous article by Judith Thompson. She imagines a situation in which a gifted violinist, for reasons that remain obscure, has taken up residence in your abdomen, Ken.
Ooh, God.
And it has to remain there for 9 months before it can be safely extracted. Now, in some sense, it would be wrong to kill the violinist, and extracting it prematurely might mean that it would die, so there'd be something morally objectionable about that. But it doesn't follow that we would have the right to prevent you from doing it. I mean, you might have a right to get things that you don't want in your abdomen out of your abdomen.
Even if they have to die.
Even if they have to die.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I think it's more subtle than but I admit it's an interesting point. But let me make a distinction. I mean, there are two basic strategies that you can imagine that people use for defending a person's right to choose an abortion.
Okay.
So, and the one strategy, I think it's probably the most straightforward strategy, makes a distinction between the human and the person. It says, basically, that the right to life pertains to persons. And it's not the case that every living human being is a person. So even if we grant, which it seems to me undeniable, I don't see how people can deny this, that a human fetus is a living human being, it doesn't follow that it's a person. It takes more to be a person than just be a living human being. And so it doesn't follow that it has a right to life and that killing it is a case of murder.
So people who advocate this line argue that being a person, as opposed to a mere human being, involves various things that fetuses don't have, at least in the early stages, at least as far as we know or can be sure of. Perhaps self-consciousness, certain emotions, the ability to feel pain, and the like.
Right, stuff like that. And then the other strategy is the one you were talking about earlier, the Judith Jarvis Thompson strategy. It says, even if a fetus is a person, even if killing it is homicide, it may be something that a woman has a right to do. Because, let me think of it, homicide is justified in certain cases in self-defense or in war, and perhaps it's justified when a person has taken up residence inside you, especially if it's taken up inside you against your will, like in the case of rape.
Right, and or these violinists. I mean, you have to really be careful. So now that we've clarified things, it should be a fairly simple matter to figure out where the truth lies and resolve these issues once and for all.
John, I think that's a little optimistic, but our chances of at least understanding the different positions and the rationale behind them might be enhanced when our guest, Cynthia Gorney, joins us in a bit. She's a UC Berkeley professor and an expert on the history of the abortion wars.
And we want our live audience here at the Marsh to join in the conversation, too.
But first, our roving philosophical reporter, Angela Kilduff, talked with someone who listens to abortion stories on a daily basis. She files this report.
We rarely hear honest accounts of abortion.
I was a 19-year-old, first-generation Indian, paralyzed by the threat of bringing shame to my family. I didn't even know what an abortion was, really. I just knew that it would fix it.
That's an excerpt from one woman's story. She recorded it with the help of the Center for Digital Storytelling and Exhale, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting women who've had an abortion.
If the pause between an inhale and exhale is divinity, the space between sorrow and healing is evolution. My abortion forced me to find my strength. My abortion gave that little girl a voice, cemented the woman, the fighter inside. My abortion gave me life.
When we talk about abortion, we default to terms like pro-life or pro-choice. These are words that come from the political debate, but the terms are limiting, according to Aspen Baker, founder and executive director of Exhale.
We all know how to talk about abortion politically. We know how to talk about abortion morally. We know that there's a religious component to talking about abortion. But one of the things that we rarely hear is about the personal experience of abortion.
1 out of every 3 women in the U.S. will have an abortion in her lifetime, making it more common than most realize.
Exhale understands that abortion will take place whether or not it's legal or illegal.
With this understanding, Exhale runs a national talk line for women.
There's so few places for them to talk about a personal experience with abortion because you don't see those stories on TV very often. You don't know who is the right person to talk to. And so they pick up the phone and they call us. And a lot of what they say is, to ask questions. Am I the only one? Do other people feel this way? How come nobody else talks about that?
Because Exhale welcomes everyone, Baker and her co-founders had to carefully consider how to position the organization.
We saw from the beginning that carrying a pro-choice or pro-life label wasn't really going to help us reach out to women who've had abortions, because women who've had abortions come from across the political spectrum. Pro-life women have abortions, pro-choice women have abortions, people who've, don't use either of those labels.
In order to place themselves outside of the traditional debate, Aspen Baker and her colleagues created their own vocabulary.
Part of the problem is that the debate has gotten so narrow that there is so little room for any new ideas or any new perspectives. And hearing from women who have had abortions would certainly bring a new perspective into the debate. And so that's our story of how we came to coin the term pro-voice as represent the fact that we believe women's experiences with abortion need to be heard and understood.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Angela Kilduff.
I'm John Perry, along with Ken Taylor, and you're listening to Philosophy Talk, coming to you from the Mars Theater in San Francisco.
And we're joined now by Cynthia Gorney. She's a professor at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. She's written very widely on the topic of abortion. She's author of Articles of Faith, a Frontline History of the Abortion Wars. Cynthia, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Very nice to be here. Thank you.
Cynthia, tell us just a little bit about how you came to write a history of the abortion wars.
I was a reporter way back in the day for the Washington Post, and I was asked to do a big magazine piece on a case that was coming before the Supreme Court that was agitating basically everybody who'd ever had anything public to say about abortion. This was in 1989, and there was great concern or elation, depending on which side you were on, that the Supreme Court was going to use this case to overturn Roe v. Wade. It was called Webster versus Reproductive Health Services. And in setting out to do that story and interview the people who had become the principals in this conflict, I went out to look for the book. And it didn't exist. And what I found, which was very interesting to me, was that there was a big, multiple shelf, as you philosophers know, of books of argument about abortion. Mm-hmm. Philosophy and why my side is right and your side is wrong, medical philosophizing. But no one had sat down to write the story. How did we get here? Mm-hmm. And so unwisely, I said, geez, I better do that. And 6 years later, I produced the book, and the subject has stayed a part of my life ever since.
Well, I don't know if it's unwise. Produced a very fine book, very helpful book. I'm a philosopher, a little weak on facts, big on arguments. Let me see if I've got any facts straight, and then you can tell us what more is known on the strictly factual side. So we know, I think, that a sperm hits an egg, and conception occurs, and there is a fetus, which is some... No.
Stopping you right there.
Okay.
No. The sperm hits the egg, conception occurs, and you've just about ended all the things that everybody agrees on in this topic.
Well, let me try a little bit. And we know that 9 months later,
yes,
something emerges one way or another from the female that we take to be a human being with rights and standing and someone who should be protected by the government and society, from its parents if necessary, by its parents if things go well.
Indeed.
In between there, a lot must happen. That reproducing live bunch of cells somehow 9 months later becomes something with the physiological and psychological properties of a newborn.
Yes.
How much do we know, and I guess you've already answered this, about when those things happen, when they feel pain, when they start to have consciousness?
I will tick off a few of the things and then suggest that most of it remains in incredibly contentious debate, as you know. We know that heartbeat can be measured quite early, so early as to make people who defend the right to abortion uncomfortable. It's definitely within about the first 3 weeks, heartbeat is detectable. We know that at some point between around 18 weeks and birth, a fetus, because by that time most people will agree the term applies, has many of the physiological properties that, if they're put together right, could amount to a perception of pain But since we can't talk to the individual in question to find out whether it's perceiving pain, we don't know that. And there's a lot of scientific argument about that. Consciousness is a question, as our president likes to say, above my pay grade. And your people will argue very extensively about that.
What are we looking for? I mean, when we look, so we're trying to look at the stage-wise development of a fetus, and it's going to help us settle this abortion issue. What do you think we're looking for?
Well, I think part of the problem is the way we're asking the question. You gentlemen are posing the question as though there's a zero, and then there's a human being, and the issue is, when do we figure out when the human being starts? I would posit that most people who are very strong pro-lifers, right-to-lifers, agree with you, and they have an answer to it. It's obvious where it starts. It starts right here because it makes no sense for it to start anywhere in between. However, most people who are not comfortable with that position will say there aren't two things. There's an in-between thing. There's something that is an on the way to being a human being thing, and that's what we're talking about.
This is a special edition of Philosophy Talk, coming to you from the Mars Theater in San Francisco. We're discussing abortion with Cynthia Gorney from the Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism.
We've tried to get as clear as we can about the facts. We'll try a little more, perhaps. But next, we're going to plunge into the morass of questions about the morality of abortion.
The rights and wrongs of abortion, along with questions from our live audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
Welcome back to Philosophy Talk. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're looking at the philosophical issues surrounding the heated issue of abortion with Cynthia Gorney, author of Articles of Faith, a frontline history of the abortion wars.
Do you believe in the right to life? The right to choose? Both? Neither? Join the discussion by stepping up to one of the microphones at either side of the stage.
So, Cynthia, in the opening, John and I trotted out these two different strategies. Michael Tooley invented this thing, well, the fetus isn't a person, so you can kill it. You're not killing a person. Well, I want you to consider an abortion in the first trimester. So what is this? Is this killing a person? Is it murder? Is it just stomping out something that maybe will be a person someday but isn't yet? Or what? What do you think?
Depends on who you're asking. And I know I know you're asking me. I know you're asking me, and the problem is I've spent too many years reading arguments on all sides of this. But I will tell you that I personally share, I think, most Americans' view that there is something in between, that it is not a zero to done deal, and that what is growing inside a woman's body during the first trimester of pregnancy is on its way to being a person and is not yet a person.
I think it's not yet a person. Let's grant this. I'm going to play, I'm going to play somebody's advocate for a second. Okay, it's not yet a person. It's on its way to being a person. Okay, this is not on its way to being a person.
That is not growing inside my abdomen.
That's true. Whatever it is.
You might want to tell your audience that you're holding up a plastic bottle
I'm holding
of water.
up a plastic bottle, yeah.
Good idea. You're very radio savvy, right?
Unfortunately, it's not growing inside your abdomen.
Fortunately,
But this thing that's growing inside a woman's abdomen is on its way to being a person. It's a living thing on its way to being a person. Why doesn't that right there endow it with... we owe things that are on their way to being persons a special concern and care to help them become persons. So why doesn't that settle the issue right there on the side of the right to life person?
Let me back you up one step, because one of the first things I realized after I had been researching this for many months is that this entire conundrum is like something cooked up to break philosophy students' heads.
Yeah.
And part of the problem with it is that...
That's the good news. Yeah.
That's the good news. And part of the problem with it is that the way that we grapple with moral issues, I know often, is to analogize. The difficulty is that nothing analogizes to pregnancy. Nothing. There is no other circumstance in which something that will become a human being lodges and grows inside another human being. We run out of ways to talk about this. So all of the logic that you're using to try to push to whether it's a person doesn't apply.
Well, let me give you another analogy.
Go for it.
just to irritate you. Right. So suppose I were to start plucking hairs from Ken's head. Maybe I should actually do it. And suppose we had a law that it's immoral, illegal to make a person bald. Right? Now, when I got down to the last hair and I plucked that from his head, I think we'd agree that he's bald. He's been made bald. When I pluck the first hair out, I haven't made him bald. Now, does it follow that there's some place in between, some particular hair, such that would make him bald? I think the natural answer is no, which means it really doesn't fit logic very well. Isn't our abortion thing like that? We know that you start out with something very basic and you end up with something very human and person-like. Does there have to be a particular line? Or why can't we just say it's just gradual, and so the whole moral question is also gradual?
Well, I personally agree with the position that you've just laid out. I'm having a lot of trouble working my way from the hairs on Ken's head to pregnancy, and I speak as someone, I'm safe to say neither of you has given birth to a child, and I have, and it's got nothing to do with hairs growing on your head.
John was making a logical point. He was making, there's no clear line between being, you start out not bald, you end up bald. There's no clear line.
Right.
But there are lots of things like that. There are lots, but
this is indeed
but there is a famous remark.
I agree. Most people would posit that there is no clear line, and when you get to birth and crowning, that's where everybody falls about in their own argument.
Right.
Because it is the case that we exist in a nation where, by virtue of the laws that we have passed to make abortion legal, we do, in fact, this is not right to life can't, we do, in fact, have hospitals in which doctors are working valiantly in one room to help women give birth to 26, 27-week fetuses, and in another room they are ending, sometimes rather horribly, the life of that very fetus because the woman has elected to do that.
I want to explore another issue about how we think about this, right? Because one of the kinds of arguments that you sometimes read on the pro-choice side, again, I'm going to advocate either one or the other, but just dig into the arguments. One of the kinds of arguments that you sometimes read in the pro-choice has to do with a woman's rights with respect to her own body. Right, and that suggests that somehow the developing fetus, at least at some stage, is to the woman's body as any other part of her body is. It's like it's part of her body, and her dominion over her body gives her dominion over the fetus up to some point, right? But that's a little odd way of thinking about it, right? Because the fetus isn't an organ and it's got a trajectory that's unlike any part of her body. Her body is what's called a homeostatic thing, a self-maintaining thing, right? But the fetus isn't just that. It's never just that, because it's always on a trajectory toward. So what do you think about that kind of argument, that the woman's right to choose follows from her dominion over her own body?
Do I think that the woman's right to choose follows from a dominion over her own body? I believe that the arguments for a woman's right to choose do, yes. I believe also personally that one of the difficulties we've had in this country with our abortion conversation is that because of a lot of reasons we could go into if we had more time, we laid the question out starting in the early 1970s as an either-or question.
Yeah.
And I don't think most people regard it as an either-or question. I'm now talking about legality. I'm not talking about when a person begins.
When you say we, do you mean we collectively, the society, or the law and the way the law conceives it?
I mean both. We began having a big argument about this state by state. The analogies to gay marriage are fascinating to me. In the late 1960s. And in 1973, the Supreme Court came down and said every state must make abortion legal effectively. We can talk if you want about this. But what they really said was effectively all the way through pregnancy. I know most people think they banned it in the third trimester, but that's not actually true. So we, from the very beginning, started in on an either or. Either it's completely a part of the woman's body and she has dominion absolutely all the way to the end, or it's absolutely a separate person and she has no choice in it. Most countries of the world do not operate on that kind of a paradigm. They regard it as a morally complex decision that becomes less and less available to the woman.
Now Roe versus Wade, although it said you couldn't make a law against it for any of the 9 months, they did make this distinction between the trimesters.
Yes.
And your example of the 6 months along fetus being destroyed in one operating theater while this premature baby exactly the same far along as trying to be preserved in the other. I mean, I think that ought to wrench anybody's heart. But that suggests that maybe the first trimester was some kind of natural watershed. Now, you've got the experience of working on all these texts and writing this history and also being a mother. Do you sense that? Is there some significant moral difference
John,
between
I hate
the
to
first?
keep pushing back on you, but I don't think watershed applies here. I think that for most people, and I share those views, there isn't a, oh, wait, it wasn't a person, and oh, wait, now it is a person
Well,
line.
a watershed's a big thing. If you've ever tried to see if you could jump across a brook.
True enough.
You know, I mean, it's hard
Yes.
to know. So I'm not saying there's a definite point. I'm just saying that as a mother,
Right.
would you have felt differently about it at a month than you would have at 6 months?
I think almost any woman who has had a child would say the answer to that is yes. And you will get a million different reactions as to how people feel about what's inside them at 1 month as opposed to 6 or 7.
So there used to be, long ago, this idea of quickening, which was basically the first time you felt the child move.
Right.
And that was thought to be a pretty natural criterion for something important. Have we really moved beyond that?
That's a really interesting question, and I would say the answer is not really. Quickening, when you think about it, for those who aren't familiar with the term, quickening is determined by the pregnant woman herself. She feels it move, and that's the point at which, in old historical ways, it's a person. That was kind of, I think most people will sort of universally feel comfortable with that point more so than many others that have been proposed in law, and yet it has no legal status whatsoever now because it's impossible to measure objectively.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about abortion, trying to shed more light than heat, with Cynthia Gorney from Berkeley, author of Articles of Faith, A Frontline History of Abortion Wars. We're in front of a live audience. We'd love questions from that live audience. Come up to the microphone on either side of the room, and we'll get you into this debate. And we have a questioner here. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir.
My name's Chris Garrett. I'm from here in San Francisco, just a few blocks away, actually. My question is this. My understanding is that Roe was decided just a few years after other decisions granting the right to birth control, even in states where that was banned. And much of the initial opposition to abortion at that time was part of broader opposition to birth control and the sexual revolution. And there wasn't this intense focus on the life of the fetus and whether or not the fetus was a human being or not, and that's a more contemporary result. Is that a correct
Yes and no.
understanding?
Your understanding is really interesting. It is the case that there was a sequence of cases exploring birth control, you are correct, in the 1960s that led the way to the establishment of something we now shorthand as the right to privacy. However, the second part of your question is not quite right. As states began introducing legal abortion measures of various kinds, much in the way that states around the U.S. now are introducing various kinds of gay marriage propositions, opposition generated intensely in states one by one to the idea that there could be such a thing as legal abortion. And the primary organizing force in most states was the Catholic Church, for whom it was more explicitly written into doctrine than any others, and also they had the best organization methods. When Roe came down in 1973, all of these nascent state-by-state right-to-life groups almost immediately, within a week, coalesced into one national right-to-life group. And their focus absolutely was on the rights of the child. And they came up with the term right to life. It had been around for about a year previously. And they were particularly jazzed by language in Roe v. Wade that said, almost as a throwaway line, if the fetus were a person, none of this would apply. But because it isn't, we're going
Right.
forward.
Let me try something out on you, a thought experiment for you or John or members of our audience. Look, we think that a pregnant woman, should take care of herself. We don't think that's just self-interest. We think she owes it to the developing fetus within her to give herself adequate care. Right? So if she can owe something to the developing fetus at the earliest stage of the fetus's being, doesn't that show that the fetus has some kind of I don't know what the moral standing of the newly conceived fetus is, but it has some moral standing, right? I mean, help me think about how to think about, okay, maybe it's not a person, it's clearly living. How do we think about the concrete moral status of
As both of us say, well, I mean, look, you might say, look, if you're going to have a kid, you should start a bank account for the kid's college education long before it's even conceived. Right? Now, why are you doing that? Because the kid has some existence as a person
Whoa,
before
whoa,
it's
whoa.
conceived?
Gentlemen.
No, you owe it to the person you're going to conceive.
There's an important thing you're failing to recognize here. Birth control, gentlemen, doesn't work. A lot of the time, many women who get pregnant and end up having abortions were using birth control.
I understand that.
It doesn't work very well. So when you say if you're going to have a kid, many women who were in an abortion clinic had no intention of having a kid. That's what they're doing there.
I'm trying to focus on how to think about the moral standing of the fetus. Okay, do I owe it something? Here's a test. Isn't the woman obligated in virtue of the, I'm just trying to think about how to think about that.
And I want you guys to understand something else as well. There is an intense argument that's underway among people who believe there should be a legal right to an abortion about exactly what you're talking about, the moral status of the fetus. Moral and legal, as you've indicated before, two different things, right? So there is a wing of the strongly pro-choice movement that says our problem is that we haven't thought enough about the moral status of the fetus.
I agree. We're listening to Philosophy Talk. We want to take questions from our live audience. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir.
My name is Mark, and I also am from San Francisco. When I hear people discuss this topic, I often wonder if the person who's asserting that there's less than personhood in the newly conceived fetus is serious, and whether it's not simply a resort position that they take because they're not willing to accept responsibility for the act of abortion. Scientific evidence seems to be going that we would, in fact, have a unique individual in some nascent stage. I mean, we have all the words for it. We're not searching for an explanation for this.
Let me answer that. I mean, the philosophical issue about what a person is goes back long before abortion. And John Locke, who was thought smart enough to give us our form of government, said a person is a conscious being that's aware that it's conscious and is aware of itself as the same thing through changes of place and time.
And he said it adds reason and reflection.
It has reason and reflection. So this conception of a person as something that not every human being measures up to, not every human individual measures up to. Maybe old people like myself who are getting towards dementia will cease to be persons long before we cease to be human beings. This is not some kind of thing invented to deal with abortions.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing abortion with Cynthia Gorney, author of Articles of Faith, a frontline history of the abortion wars.
Next, we're going to dig even deeper into the rights and wrongs of abortion. What about women who are pregnant due to rape or incest? Do these women have special rights? Is the threat of overpopulation a reason for permitting abortion or loosening the rules against it? Lots of questions still to discuss.
We're coming to you from the Marsh Theaters, San Francisco's breeding ground for new performance. We'll take more questions from our live audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
No breeding. Welcome back to the program. I'm John Perry. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. We're discussing abortion with Cynthia Gorney, author of Articles of Faith, a frontline history of the abortion wars. And we've got more questions from our live audience here at the Marsh. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, ma'am.
Thank you. My name's Holly Carpenter, and my question is, you're giving a lot of weight and discussion to the woman's moral obligation to take care of a child during pregnancy, and how much do you compare that with the woman's obligation as a mother to give a child a good life, which is what we hope all children enter the world with?
Is behind your question the thought that some abortions may prevent lives that would be undesirable because the unwanted child without means, and so is that part of what's behind your question?
Exactly.
Well, Cynthia, I'm going to turn that hard one over to you.
It's a very good and it's a very hard question. It has a lot of ramifications, obviously, with regard to government intervention, for example. If the government is going to in any way interfere with a woman's ability to get an abortion, is the government then going to turn around and say, fine, if you're going to have that child, we're going to help you take care of the child for the next 18 years? The answer is no, we're not. And that is one of the primary points raised by people who have a lot of problem with government intervention.
That means that, so the question, the sort of moral complexity of the question of abortion is increased by a social setting in which we view child rearing as sort of like the responsibility of the lonely parent unaided by Hillary Clinton's village, as it were.
It's important, though, to remember that what motivates so many right-to-life people in this country to the kind of passion that they carry is that they really do regard themselves as sort of the underground during World War II, if you will.
I know.
This thing is so important that, yes, we need more government resources for women as the children are being raised, but that's not as important as the fact that they're killing them in utero.
Right, it's the first duty to make sure that life is protected.
And that's it's important for people to bear in mind, regardless of what their position is, that most people in this country who label themselves right to life genuinely believe what some people have posited philosophically here, that it does begin at conception and that there is no difference between killing a 2-month-old gestate and killing a 2-year-old because the woman's life is in difficulty.
And so they use words like Holocaust.
And so they will use words like Holocaust and like unborn child, which is used cynically by many politicians in this country, but not cynically by the vast majority of people in the trenches of right to life who truly believe it.
So we've got another question from our live audience. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, sir.
Thank you. My name is Tim Blackwood from San Jose. And I'd like to go back to the idea of the morally complex that you mentioned earlier, Cynthia. Because I've always felt that the law really can't handle some of these ideas. Because the law has to function by putting things into boxes. I mean, I was a lawyer for 30 years. And so I know a little bit about the law. My point is, we've got to see that it depends on the situation. It really is a question of people, with maybe counselors and so on, looking at their lives and where they are and what they can do and how they feel about this. And there's a whole privacy realm that this should occur in, and that really our society should foster that, rather than try to follow the illegal line. So,
it's interesting. One of the lesser-known pieces of history with regard to this argument is that as these laws, state by state, were first being discussed, some of the most eloquent arguments against state interference in abortion, in other words, what would later be called pro-choice arguments, came from Jesuits. There was a particular Jesuit priest who did a lot of writing on this, who made pretty much the same argument that you have just made, which is to say, look, I believe this to be morally unacceptable. I also believe it to be medical practice that has no place in our system of laws. This has to be handled as a moral matter and as a medical matter. The law just needs to stay out altogether. His voice obviously was drowned out in the ensuing argument.
But you know what? I actually think the Supreme Court did a kind of problematic thing in Roe v. Wade because of the following. Because obviously Americans as a collectivity were not through talking about this to each other. Did not have a consensus, did not have a deeply held shared set of commitments that entailed it should be like this. And so when the Supreme Court chose sides, they stirred up all this angst.
You might think it was good that they didn't wait.
Well, there's a wide body of legal argument, Ken, that agrees with you and says, number one, the decision was very weird reasoning, regardless of what you think ultimately about the outcome. And number two, it came too fast, too soon, which is part of the reason that I personally am watching the gay marriage arguments with such
it's really
tremendous
complicated. Though I agree with it about abortion in general, I think, but sometimes the Supreme Court does the right thing. So if it had waited on school desegregation and all that, and it's like, okay, we'd be waiting another century. And that stirred up all kinds of angst, too. So it's a really complicated thing. But John, you had another question.
We don't have an audience member here, so I'm going to ask you a question. I've wanted to ask an expert on this. There's kind of a consensus among people like Keith Olbermann and Rachel Maddow and other people a little bit on the liberal side that, right to life may be a reasonable position, but it's not reasonable unless they'll admit an exception in the case of rape and incest. If you want to paint a politician as really beyond the pale, you say they're not only right to live, they don't even support the exception of rape and incest. Now, obviously, rape and incest, you can understand the emotions involved. It's a terrible thing to happen, and the mother who may be unhappy about a pregnancy is going to be much more unhappy if it's a result of rape or incest. But from the right to life point of view, how could they possibly admit an exception? Suppose when I was conceived about 68, 69 years ago, my mother was raped, perhaps even by a close relative, so that incest was also involved. Just couldn't be more terrible. that would have been very sad, and I'm sure my mother would have felt quite bad about it. But I don't think it gives me the right to people kill me now because I was the product of rape and incest, and I don't see why it would have meant a difference even when I was a fetus. I mean, if the pro-choicers are right, that's one thing, but if the right to lifers are basically right, surely they shouldn't allow an exception.
So what do you say?
You have addressed what, to my mind, is the most fascinating structural weakness right now in the politics of right-to-life argument. Right-to-lifers completely agree with what you just laid out. If you are a thoughtful, dedicated right-to-life person, and in saying so, I exclude about 95% of the politicians in this country who now label themselves right to life in an effort to get those votes, that argument makes perfect sense to you. If you believe life begins at conception, it begins at conception, and we don't make exceptions for killing certain people because the circumstances were too bad, right? So you don't believe in rape, incest exceptions. You believe in counseling for the mother and adoption and so on, but you don't believe that killing that baby, because you think of it as a baby, is the right thing to do. However, you also know, if you're a right-to-lifer, that people in the United States who haven't spent the last 10 years of their lives breaking their heads thinking about this think that's terrible. They don't agree with you. They think you're soulless. So therefore, they're in a terrible conundrum.
Well, that's in politics, and the social discourse is so messed up that you can't even sit down and have a long-form conversation about what follows from what. How do you balance these competing pools? You can't even do that in public discourse. And that's why we need to do radio shows like this. And that's why we need books like yours. Do you regret writing that book, or are you glad you wrote it? Because I know it. You know.
I do not regret writing it. It was the most difficult thing I ever hoped to have taken on in my life, but I have learned so much, and it did open my eyes to so many philosophies and ways of looking at the world that were very different from mine.
We've got another questioner. You're probably our last questioner. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Lori, and I'm from Daly City, California. I think going back to the question of rape, it adds another part into the abortion debate that of course, is also a huge thing, is people's thoughts on women's decision-making or their judgments about their sexuality, because if people, the right-to-lifers who believe that incest or rape are exceptions, are kind of saying that the women who are getting abortions that aren't from incest or rape, they deserve it because they were sexual, because they got themselves pregnant.
I completely agree with you. The assumption, if you believe that abortion should be illegal except for rape and incest, what you're basically saying is, unless it completely was not the woman's fault, and I'm making quotation marks for you radio people around fault, that the woman must be forced to have that child.
And I feel like that isn't really brought into the abortion debate as much as it should be these days.
Well, the abortion debate, yeah, that's the Judy Jarvis Thompson thing. So this creature is attached to you, not literally in your body on her example, but through a tube, an uninvited guest, and you should have the right. But I still want to go back to something. I don't think most of the public arguments on either side are really very deep. They're a cover for preconceived positions, deep political agendas.
It's too emotional, Ken.
Right.
Nobody wants to have a philosophical argument about it. You want to know whether you can get the abortion or not.
I know. So how do we get can we get Americans to actually talk and listen and reason with one another as people trying to live together and have a way of life together? Can we do that? Do you have any hope of that, having been on the front lines of this?
Efforts like this are helpful. There have been a number of efforts to get people to sit down and talk with one another. And beyond that, it seems an awful long haul.
Yeah, well, on that sort of pessimistic note, Cynthia, I'm gonna thank you for joining us. It's been a very enlightening conversation.
Thank you very much.
Our guest has been Cynthia Gorney. She's a professor at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, author of Articles of Faith, a frontline history of the abortion wars.
And we want to thank everyone in our live audience for participating in the program. Please give yourselves a round of applause.
John, I have to admit that my mind about this issue is very, very, very unsettled. It's always been unsettled. My liberal friends always are astounded when I start talking about these things, how pulled I am by the arguments on both sides of this thing. So I don't know, what's your thinking?
Well, you know, there's a philosophical point of view that is often regarded as very simple-minded. It's the point of view of general semantics, which Senator Hayakawa used to believe in, for those of you that are old enough to believe. And it's the idea that all of our philosophical problems and most of our social problems come from having words that stand for more than one thing. But here I think there is sort of a problem. I mean, because if you take this 9-month spectrum, we have one word, abortion, for the act, whether it's a late-term abortion or a morning after abortion. And, that's really extremely crude vocabulary for a very complex, admittedly gradual process. Do I know what the vocabulary should be? Sure, but I don't have time to tell you.
Well, on that fine note, I'll say that this conversation continues, as always, on our blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org, where our motto is cogito ergo blogo. I think, therefore I blog.
And you can download podcasts of our program from our website as well. For the final word, we turn to that both human and person, Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes, I don't really want to weigh in on the abortion debate because, well, I don't feel like it, okay? And it's none of my business. But I will note that there aren't that many lighthearted looks at abortion in pop culture. We do, however, have plenty of lighthearted movies and TV shows about the alarming results of fertility. Cheaper by the Dozen, Yours, Mine, and Ours, that reality show with the Duggars, 19 Kids and Counting, The Brady Bunch, The Partridge Family. There are movies about people choosing to have children. Knocked Up, Juno. There's Children of Men, about a baby about to be born in a world without children. And there are indie movies by The Score, about single moms trying to find love and happiness while caring for their wisecracking and off-putting offspring. But there's another side to pop culture's family values. I'm talking about the evil child genre. Pigtailed Rhoda from The Bad Seed, Damien from The Omen. There was The Unborn, about a stillborn twin who really wants to join us here in the mortal coil. Complications ensue. Rosemary's Baby, you may recall, is the actual offspring of Satan, or somebody like him. Possessed by the Night starred Shannon Tweed, mind-controlled by a fetus in a jar, who makes her take her clothes off a lot, like she needed a reason. The Dawn of the Dead remake featured a zombie baby, as did Dead Alive, an early movie from Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson. 1974 gave us Grave of the Vampire, about a young mother who gives birth to a vampire baby who prefers blood to milk. And I Don't Want to Be Born, Joan Collins is a pregnant stripper who rejects a dwarf's advances. Naturally, this leads to her unborn child being cursed, and the resultant toddler winds up killing mom, dad, nanny, and a pediatrician played by Donald Pleasance, of course, the doctor from Halloween who was trying to stop Michael Myers, who had also been an evil child. Basket Case is about a young man who carried his formerly conjoined twin around in a basket to jump out from time to time to kill people. It's Alive had a newborn who only killed when it became frightened, but he was very easily frightened. There is Stewie on Family Guy, the creepy blonde children from Village of the Damned. We had Reagan in The Exorcist, the scary twin girls in The Shining. Drew Barrymore in Firestarter. Oh, she wasn't really evil, just explosive. The Ring featured a psychopathic dead girl who kills you if you watch her on television. There's The Children of the Corn, The Good Son with Macaulay Culkin gone bad, Pet Sematary, The Baby from Eraserhead, The Awful Children and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. There's The Demon Seed, about an artificial intelligence system that wants to have a baby and does. Lord of the Flies. Stretching things a bit, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? With Bette Davis as a child star gone horribly wrong. Stretching things even further, there's the baby in Alien, which likes to build its nest in the chests of British actors, only to bust out and kill everybody except Sigourney Weaver and the Orange Cat. Called, anybody? That's right, Jones. Neutered Tom. No evil kittens there that we know of. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University. Copyright 2010.
Our executive producer is David Demarest. Special thanks to Eric Blazeski and Joshua Raul Brody.
Thanks also to Dan Brandon, Angela Kilduff, Merle Kessler, and Corey Goldman.
Our production coordinator is the brilliant Devin Strolovich. Daniel Elstein and Ben Hirsch are our directors of research, and the wise Leo Weiss is our webmaster.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk,
and from the members of KALW, local public radio, San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
Though they should. The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org.
I'm John Parrish.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.
That's a wrap.